So, saw a little bit of waves on social media recently. There was a Forbes article referencing a study that was done on, they called it here, and there's a printout, The Science of Scares. And they researched various horror movies. I can't remember if it was 50 movies or 100 movies to see what were the scariest ones. And they measured the heart rate of the viewers, and they saw which one had the largest average, beats per minute of the heart rates and stuff like that.
Where can you get a job like this?
I actually, when it was coming out, there was actually a company that was going to pay you. They selected you randomly. They were going to pay you to watch all of Stephen King's movies to measure your heartbeat.
Interesting.
I didn't get selected. Go ahead.
So I don't know. You guys, I think you guys have seen the list, so I'm not going to have you try and guess what's on here. But the number one movie that was listed on here was Sinister, which is actually quite a good movie. Ethan Hawke, very good movie.
And I want to talk about that because I love how you and I have completely different reactions to that movie.
Mm-hmm.
That tells you everything you need to know about this list, I think.
Yes.
Well, go ahead.
But I want to read off the top 10. And I saw some comments here on Facebook. I had the kind of same reaction. But to be honest, when I saw what they had done as a study, I had some pretty big assumptions on how the list was going to turn out, and it turned out exactly like I expected. And so we can talk about that. But number one was in Sinister. Number two, Insidious. Number three, The Conjuring. 4, Hereditary. Then going down the list, Paranormal Activity, It Follows, Conjuring 2, The Babadook, The Descent, and The Visit. What do you notice with all top 10s?
They're relatively new. Yeah,
every single one.
And the.
Yeah, I
think they were all written by Bentley Little.
So, just out of curiosity, if you go down the rest of the list here, or further down the list, also number 11 is The Ring, 12 is A Quiet Place, and then finally number 13, the first movie I would consider a classic, which is Nightmare on Elm Street. And also right after that is Halloween. But so I kind of figured it would happen this way for a couple reasons. I'm really not surprised. One, they had different viewers at different ages, but you have to imagine a lot of people that sign up for this are horror fans. The older the movie is, the more likely people have seen it.
Yep.
So if you're measuring heart rate, horror has a very limited shelf life. Even you go to something like Alien, the xenomorph loses its scares after a while. And so it does not have the same effect. My wife had seen some of the Aliens movies when she was younger, was terrified of it, but a little while ago we actually convinced her to watch it with us. She watched no problem because movies age.
Once something becomes part of the popular zeitgeist, it loses its power. For example, this is why I do not teach Romeo and Juliet anymore. These kids know nothing about the play. They just know that Romeo and Juliet both die at the end. Yep. They already know. They're informed by a culture that was raised on Romeo and Juliet, so there's no point in teaching them the play because they already got the ending.
Yep. But I think also, too, the movies age, one, because it's been seen before, but also it's just the patterns of the movies, the style, the special effects, those also age. Things that were scary way back when turn campy. And that's been true of horror movies for the last 70 years. It's even going back further than that. I'm not really surprised. I don't think they could, given this style, comparing multi-generational movies, I don't really think you could expect old movies to hold up the same way, even though they're considered classics and can be appreciated. I don't think they just scare the same way.
Right.
But Tom, what are your thoughts? I know that you're always big fan of when we get to watch like a classic retro horror movie. What are your thoughts on seeing a list like this where it doesn't rate high for scares, but it has a classic status?
Well, I like the fact is they're using some modern, updated science and technology on this one because, if they had this back in the 70s and 80s and they could have tried it then maybe. It's I think it's strongly possible. I don't want to sound mean about this. I don't want to sound like an old codger. Of the concept that maybe we have a little bit of a numbing effect because we're so inundated. Desensitized. Thank you very much. However, I do like the fact that so far I think it's safe to say none of the movies that you mentioned are the I hate to say standard Hollywood trope, stupid young people doing stupid things and then paying the price for it.
No, I think the list is actually some very good movies, even for the modern ones. Movies that I've enjoyed. One movie that comes to mind is a classic, number 17 on the list, The Exorcist.
Oh yeah.
I've heard a lot. This one predates me a bit, but people
predates us too. We're not that old.
It's a movie that had people running out of theaters screaming, and I've seen some of the footage of people that are freaking out about it. it had a strong effect. I would imagine that back in the day when people saw The Exorcist, if you measured their heart rate back then when it was a fresh movie with fresh special effects, no one knows what to expect. I imagine the heart rates would have been quite a bit higher and would have scored higher on this list.
And sales of pea soup would have gone down too.
I do have to say that, please hold your tomatoes. I've never seen The Exorcist, but I will tell you I read the novel. And I made the mistake of reading the novel at home by myself when it was dark. It was a pretty...
You have really good night vision then.
I mean, obviously, it was dark outside.
Oh, Kevin, there's nothing wrong with Pazuzu. Oh, sorry, did I say that out loud?
You did.
Yeah. But no, I saw people... one of the big reactions I noticed, and I'm not surprised, people were saying, how can people just throw off the old movies? The reality is, I mean, they lose a bit of their scare, but they don't lose their place as a classic.
Right.
They're just not going to have the same effect. Plus, like I mentioned, when you have viewers, most people have probably seen some movies like Nightmare on Elm Street. You can't expect that movie to have the same effect. The newer the movie is, more likely it is to be fresh to the audience and therefore scare them more. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting list. I think when you look at the generations, you see the first movies going back into like the 80s and 70s and stuff. You see some of the classics that are there that are established classics. They've earned that place. They were frightening back then. They still have their scares now, especially for a new viewer. There's a reason they're on that list, but I don't think we can expect them to hold that place because it's just the nature of the study. I think you would have to start with, go by generations, maybe have nothing but young viewers watching some of the old classics, and maybe, people who have not watched the movies watching those ones. It's a different kind of study.
Also, too, anytime you have a study like this, it's so subjective. For example, let's talk about the '1 movie on there, Sinister. Chuck, why don't you share your thoughts about Sinister, and then I'll share mine.
I thought it was a little bit more by the numbers. I wasn't really blown away in terms of having like an interesting narrative, but I thought it was fantastically well done, and it did have some scary moments. And the core of the movie, if you've not seen it. Sinister. Ethan Hawke one. Yeah, that's the one with the sweater. That's the sweater movie.
He's wearing his
he has the author sweater.
And he never turns any lights on in any room he's in.
Yes. And so there's a lot of tropey things, and yes, there's the lights ones that you're kind of like, why is this not on? Which we're going to be talking about, Haunting of Bly Manor, and same thing early on. There's a scene where like, why aren't the lights on? It feels
because
a bit forced.
It's a British ghost story.
So there's that. It didn't blow me away in terms of the story. I maybe people had kind of built it up a little bit, and when you see like #1 on the list, you're expecting this is going to be a revolutionary movie. I thought it was pretty routine. However, I'm trying to think of the term I want. The video clips he has, the recordings of the death scenes. What's the term when you have the recordings of the deaths?
I don't know what it was. Yeah, they were
stuff films. Stuff films.
Okay,
Yes, the people that died, and he's watching those, and you're seeing it. That was effective. So some of the scares there, and there's one part they show a little heart rate monitor on there on the printout. I can tell you which scene it was that jumped because I saw it, and it was a terrifying scene. And there's one scene in particular that was like
Is it the lawnmower
piece de resistance?
Scene?
Yes.
Yeah, I was worried about the lawnmower scene. I still yelped when I saw
and
that.
you're watching it, and you know it's coming.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It's still
doesn't matter at all.
It was effective.
Yeah.
So I'm not really surprised it made it on there. I think it probably connects with a larger audience because it feels more real.
Yeah.
I think when you get into something that's a bit more, this is not super paranormal. When you get something that's more paranormal, you lose some of the audience. Not everyone's into that kind of thing, and that more fantastical element. It's paranormal, but it feels more grounded. Yeah. That said, it has a paranormal aspect that I don't think worked as well. There's other movies that are paranormal that do better on that side.
With the Ghoul at the end,
yes.
when the Ghoul comes out, you had a hard time with that.
I had a hard time with it just because I didn't think it was done effectively. It wasn't like I watched. I'm like, this came out of left field, stuff like that. I just felt like when it got into the creepy children, which was again very by the numbers, and it gets into the Ghoul, it didn't land. It didn't stick the landing. Everything up to that I thought was very effective. The last 15, 20 minutes, something like that, just felt kind of like they didn't work through it as well.
Right. Now, for example, for me, at that point, the last 15 minutes of the movie, I was so swept up in everything that was going on. I just sat there like, that's really... So I think that's a list like this. You also have to keep in mind subjectivity. Yep. We're all have different triggers and things like that. I am totally happy with Sinister being number 1.
Oh yeah, I'm fine with it too.
Here's another thing though about a list like this, and I know a lot of horror writers who would. This is a big bugaboo. Have you ever seen 8mm?
No.
Is that the monster movie? I'm trying to think.
No.
No, wait. Oh, no.
No.
It's a Nick Cage movie, I'm pretty sure.
Nick Cage. It may be Nick Cage's finest performance.
Nope, I have not seen that one.
Why is 8mm not in this film? You know why 8mm is not in this film? Because it wasn't marketed as horror. Let me give you a brief rundown of 8mm. 8mm, Nick Cage is a private investigator who's been hired by this rich old widow whose husband has just died, and she has just discovered in her husband's vault, apparently her husband liked the sexy snuff films, and one in particular where a girl
I remember the
was
movie. I remember the trailer
slaughtered.
for that one.
So the lady hires Nick Cage to find out, is this girl really dead? So this takes Nick onto a... Okay, we're not talking Jenna Jameson porn here either. This takes...
That's very specific.
I just outed myself by saying Jenna Jameson. We'll move on.
You also dated yourself.
Yeah, I know that I outed myself. I dated myself. No, we're not talking about like sexy, glamorous porn. Nick Cage's character goes out into like L.A. and he's like in the gutter trying to find out whether or not this girl was actually killed. It is absolutely horrifying. And spoiler alert. He finally finds the guy responsible for killing the girl. He gets the mother on the phone and says, "What do you want me to do?" I mean, I'm sorry, that movie is horrific. It's a horror film. It's not on this list because it wasn't marketed as a horror film. So that's something, I mean, still, to my mind, it may be Nick Cage's best performance ever. There's this shot at the very end of the film where he's just standing, a broken man, raking leaves in front of his house. And then he gets a letter in the mail from the girl's mom. And we finally see a little bit of resolution for him. But it wasn't marketed as a horror film, so it's not on this list.
I just remembered the movie I was thinking of when you said 8mm. Super 8. That was the movie I was thinking of.
Super 8.
Yeah, it was a very different movie.
Wonderful.
It's fun.
That's just a love. That is Stranger Things before Stranger Things.
Yeah, very
That's
much
a great movie. So anyway, your mileage may vary. It's a great list that Forbes put out.
Don't give them a hard time. I mean, that's they say
yeah.
when you look at it, it was bound to happen the way they did it. I think what you can do is you can kind of look by the generations. It's similar to when you get sports debates. The league changes and things like that, athletics changes. You really can't compare generations so well. You have to kind of look at that generation, say who was the best at that time and who really set themselves apart from their peers, and kind of compare it that way. So it's a fun list. I think it's an informative list, but the end result with being all steeped in modern movies, it was bound to happen.
So it's also, I find, very interesting, besides I said getting a job studying this sort of thing, that there may be college kids writing a thesis about horror and looking up every horror review site on YouTube. Maybe we'll be on one.
On a side note, this is an off-the-cuff book recommendation, only because you mentioned this. I can only imagine the best job ever. There is a writer and a cultural philosopher named Noel Carroll. Mm-hmm. He wrote an amazing book called The Philosophy of Horror. So he spent an entire year doing nothing but reading and watching horror so he could write this book. What a gig. And he probably got paid. He probably got a fellowship.
Kevin, you did that but didn't get paid.
Right, yeah, that's my life, but I don't get paid for it. So
let's pay him, ladies and gentlemen. Come on.
Into the Abyss Patreon, soon to be coming.